Funding for Behind the Headlines is provided by DHG and Advisors. DHG is a full-service accounting firm serving Memphis and the Mid-South region for more than 60 years, combining community involvement with the technical resources of a national firm. For more information, visit dhgllp.com.
Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Mayor A.C. Wharton on city finances and more tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I am joined tonight by Mayor A.C. Wharton from the City of Memphis. Thank you for being back.
Thanks for the invitation.
Also, Brian Collins, Finance Director for the City of Memphis. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
And Bill Dree, Senior Reporter with the Memphis Daily News. So it is budget season, and it's probably a budget season to some degree unlike others. Bill might disagree, he's been through a lot, but we're coming off what you all have framed, I think most people frame as a real financial crisis. Tremendous changes in benefits for better or worse, a lot of fights, a lot of political fights about spending, coming off a huge recession. And coming, most recently, the CIA did a big multi-part series looking back at the history of how, from their point of view and others' point of view, how did the city get in the mess it's in? Your take on, let's start there, Mayor, how did the city get in the hole it got into, and is it out of that hole?
Well, as you said, it took 6 prints for the commercial appeal. It would take another 6 hours for me to tell you that. I think the CA has done a great job of just spreading that out. It's just, I don't think anybody deliberately set out to do anything, but someone pointed out that decisions were made without full consideration given to the long-term ramifications of those decisions. I don't think anybody set out to design a pension plan, which they said, oh, we can't afford this, but it'll keep the employees happy. I don't think anybody did that. They did not foresee some of the recessions that we've been in. So it's enough, I don't know whether you call it blame or fault or whatever, but it goes back over decades. There's no one, and that's what did it. Had we not done that, there are any number of things, and it would take too long to go through all of those. The school funding decision, that is defunding the schools and then getting hit with that judgment, which caused us to have to go and borrow things that I never would have done had it not been for trying to keep the schools open. So there's enough responsibility to spread around over 30 or 40 years.
Yeah, but are you confident now with this budget you're taking to City Council that, and with the changes that have been made over the last few years, that the city is on a better trajectory?
We are, but it's a trajectory, Eric, that could be thrown off course just like that. Changes on the City Council, if 2 votes change one way or the other, council members leaving, and the key now is discipline. When you look at what I was able to do over in the county, there was one thing different. When I designed the debt plan, we stuck with it. I did not have to worry about this vote changing, that vote changing. And if you look at the county now, it's in good, solid shape because of what we did, as Mayor Luttrell pointed out a few days ago. So we're not shouting. We're not celebrating. My fingers, toes are crossed. We're on the right trajectory, but it's fragile.
Let's talk, Brian Collins, specifics of what are these key points, in round numbers, the key changes that were made in benefits. And again, people talk a lot about the pensions and healthcare funding for retirees and current employees. What were those changes specifically, and what are your specific concerns that changes that could get made that could alter this trajectory that you all feel good about?
Sure. The big changes, of course, were to retiree health care. We made a big change to what's called OPEB, and in the long run, that is going to shift $20 million per year to the city, which we're going to move to help finance the pension. Secondly, we reformed the pension plan itself. That is going to have short-term and long-term benefits. In the short term, it's lowering the annual required contribution we have to make, and in the long term, we're going to be less susceptible to the ups and downs of the market. Thirdly, we were able to build reserves sufficiently to settle the litigation with the Memphis City Schools, Shelby County Schools. And then finally, we were able to restructure our debt. And the debt picture we were looking at was very substantial. Over the next 5 years, we were looking at increased debt service payments that were going to be on the order of $25 million a year. So those were the very big issues that we were looking at over the next 5 years that we really had to clear out of the way. And when you stack all of those up, they equaled probably on the order of about a $50 million boulder in the middle of the road that we had to deal with. Now that we have gotten those under control, and it is fragile, we're now able to start dealing with some of the more longer-term structural issues that have always been there.
And so let me just run through some numbers and I'll turn things over to Bill. The budget you're proposing has a $14 million gap for this coming fiscal year, which is the continuation of some healthcare benefits for one more year, or through the end of the year, if I got that right. So that's a $14 million hit. But the next 4 years, you've got break-even budget, potentially under 2 million, deficit of 3 million, deficit of 4 million, versus without those changes, your point of view, the trajectory was that 5 years out, there's the $50 million deficit. So people get a sense of, again, not the exact forecast, as you would say, but a kind of trajectory that the changes you've made get us into a roughly break-even budget with some tweaking versus the $50 million deficit. Is that fair?
Yes, and it's a budget that's very conservative on revenue growth. We're hoping that the economy remains on the present upturn. I just saw this morning unemployment is down. We're hoping all of that, but we didn't count on that. So we've tried to give ourselves some margin in there. But
a revenue growth on this here, the 1.3% per year over the next 5 years.
Just the bare minimum. Hopefully it will be more.
And holding the kind of operating, and we'll get into some operating, but holding those fairly steady, because that's one of the things people point at. Okay, Bill.
You've also, with the capital improvements budget, which is different, the administration took a lot of hits from the council at this time a year ago for kind of busting the cap on the capital budget to the tune of about $82 million. I think 65 was the cap that you all had set on. Well, this year, it's kind of the other side of that equation. You're doing 55 million.
Let me make a lead in, and then Brian will get into some of the details. We submit budgets that stay basic within the cap, but the budget we submit seldom is the budget that ends up coming out. A lot of that is added on when it gets to the council. I want to make that clear.
Yeah, and Bill, you really hit on it. Last year was an oversized capital budget, but capital budgets, every year isn't like the last. Sometimes there are larger projects and bigger opportunities. So if what we're trying to do over the long run is stay on that trajectory in that $65 to $70 million range. The budget this year at 55, if you take last year's and this year's, add them together and divide, we're at about $70 million a year. So what the administration hopes to do is after any year where we might be a little on the high side, we'll follow that up with a year a little bit on the low side. Over the long run, if we stay within that range, we're going to keep our total debt level to slightly declining.
And we should point out for folks who don't go from budget season to budget season like we do, that the capital spending are essentially construction projects, one-time expenses that are financed with bonds, and then the city pays off the debt from those bonds.
And if I might just quickly, folks say, well, why are you borrowing? It's not a matter of being broke or anything, but the theory behind borrowing, say, a 30-year bond, is that everybody who uses the amenities or whatever is the fire station, it's spread across more than one generation. I mean, theoretically, I guess we could save up money and make this generation pay for a fire station, but what about the 2 or 3 other generations that will also use it? So it's just a principle of spreading the cost across generations.
So part of isn't one of the criticisms that the city got to the point where it was was or was close to borrowing to fund operating expenses. Is that right? And that is not a principle that cities should follow?
No.
Yeah.
You
I mean, that's what
never do
Detroit
that.
did. Detroit did very famously to the tune of many millions and then billions of dollars. They're borrowing to fund salaries. They're borrowing. So it's kind of a Ponzi scheme or living off your credit cards, right?
We have been very conservative, quite frankly. As a matter of fact, with the pension thing, folks came in and said there's a thing called pension bonds. Borrow your way out of this pension thing. We said it looks attractive, and it politically it would have been easier to do. We wouldn't have to go through all of the cuts and things. But we've stayed away from things like that. When we borrow, it's for, as Bill pointed out, for those long-term projects.
Let me ask one more thing on pensions here, real quickly. The state of Tennessee, the comptroller came through and said, look, municipalities, counties around the state have to begin. They can't continue to underfund their pensions, and they pointed at Memphis and some other places, and it's a national phenomenon. States, cities, counties, all over the country have had trouble with this. Let me ask you, Brent, are you confident that the trajectory you're on now, that you will meet that obligation, and when?
Absolutely. We have to meet it by 2020. Okay. And I'm comfortable that with the growth that we have, and if we maintain the expense control, if we don't fall off that wagon, we definitely can get there in 5 years. And I think that there's always the possibility we could get there earlier.
Well, earlier gets
but not
into
much.
Earlier gets into critics on the council. Jim Strickland, who's running for mayor against you, AC. Has said, well, we should be doing this in 2 years. We should be doing this faster. Why can't the city take care of this and meet its obligations to the pensioners faster?
You know, one of the worst things for a lawyer to do is to hire an expert and have your own expert come in and tell you that you're wrong. When we were going through the refinancing, the council hired an expert, and the councilman stood up and said, we ought to do this in 2 years, and she just said resolutely, you can't do it in 2 years because you don't have the money. We just flat out don't have the money. It would be one heck of a mess if we were to try to do that. I wish we could do it in 1 year, but we got to run a city and provide essential services at the same time. We can't do that.
There seems to be a peril to the very tentative prosperity that we're experiencing, and that is that so many of the big projects that the city has these days, I think most cities across the country, are public-private partnerships. So in the case of the current fiscal year, the public-private partnership was Raleigh Springs Mall that came along. So the question became, does the city participate in that? Does the city go down that road or not? So a public-private partnership that comes up in the fiscal year that starts July 1, how does the city weigh whether or not to get involved in that, whether or not to essentially go for the benefit of that kind of project?
Well, first of all, we do look at the numbers, but then there's much more than just the black and white numbers. The Raleigh Springs Mall, that is one of the most beautiful sections of our city. And what really hit Raleigh was when the Martin Wolf Chase opens, like a giant sucking sound. How do we stabilize a community like Raleigh, where we've had folks who've lived there for generations and generations? What is the likelihood of attracting the private sector? Believe you me, we have done years of research to see what will likely be attracted. And right now we have one medical facility that's just hopping to get right in there. So before we do this, we look at what is the likelihood that private dollars will follow, and each time we do it, we've made a determination that private dollars will follow. Plus, we needed those amenities out there. We needed a new traffic station for MPD. That was money we had set aside already, $30 million. We just moved it from one side of the road to the other. Once we put that police station in there, that's going to give a symbol of, hey, this must be a pretty safe place. I'll open up my clothing store there. I'll open up a grocery store there. So it's a determination of what is the likelihood that private dollars will follow and what are the benefits to the community as a whole. And that's why we exist, to meet the needs of the public. And so if we're meeting a real need and if there's a likelihood that will attract private dollars, we go.
In terms of this budget year coming up, the council also this past Tuesday talked about the plan to move some city divisions into the state office building, the Donnelly J. Hill office building, which is in the same Civic Center Plaza as City Hall. And during that discussion, it came up that the city's Information Technology Division has since signed a lease down the street at Pembroke Square. And I believe IT was considered at one point as a possible tenant at Donnelly J. Hill, but they were on a 1 year or more extension of their lease there. Is Donnelly J. Hill a viable project in that regard?
Oh, yes, it is. With police operations, fire, and other operations. I don't know whether it was announced, some of the MHA, HCD operations. So, yes, it is. But Bill, let me point out one thing. With respect to that state office building, it was a bit similar to Redbird Stadium. The state actually, for about a week, put plywood on those doors until I stepped out and saw it, and I said, what in the heck are you doing? Here we are right then, a building going dark. I mean, so I had to look at that just in terms of what the appearance would do to downtown, where we're trying to project a viable and recovering city. So that alone pushed me toward going for the deal, not to mention the fact that we'll save $1 million a year on rent that we're now paying to the county for the MPD headquarters operations, and we have other operations that we'll be able to move in. If we move in the MHA, HCD offices in there, sell that real estate, it is a viable project. And by the way, that building's in good shape.
And I think the estimate that I saw is that from the sale of where Housing and Community Development and the MHA building are, that's about $2 million. And of course, that's a preliminary estimate at this point.
Right, but if you own property downtown, it's getting more and more valuable every day. So we think we'll get a good return on that.
You talked about public-private partnerships. One criticism people have when they talk about the financial crisis or they talk about the budgeting is that the city does a lot of tax giveaways in the form of pilots. You know, we're giving away money to Bass Pro, we're giving away money to Electrolux, we're giving away money to get IKEA. We're giving away money, not, telling these businesses they don't have to pay taxes, and that is part of the budget whole. Now, I know you disagree with that, but for people who haven't heard the other side of the argument there, why are these tax incentives not tax giveaways, and why are they not a hit to the bottom line of the city's finances?
I could give my standard answer, but there's thousands of people. Brett, why don't you? Maybe they will accept a fresh answer from a fresh face, and then I'll do the color commentary.
It's always characterized as a tax giveaway, but people don't look back far enough and say, where did each one of these individual properties start out? You have properties that are anywhere from vacant properties with no building, or they're just ground, and they are paying almost no taxes whatsoever. When it goes into a pilot, it's not that it usually has a 4 or 5-fold increase in the tax that it used to be paying, and that's just phase one. So you almost always have an increase in tax revenue from the time you grant the pilot. If you look a year before, and then the year after, it's a tax increase. Then you have all of the activity associated with developing that, the jobs. We were talking about Bass Pro, the jobs to build it, the jobs that populate those buildings. And then, depending on the length of the pilot, it rolls out of the pilot and eventually is paying full fare. So to look at it as just a discount from the eventual tax it'll pay to what it's paying today really ignores the entire story of that whole development. It's a positive, and if you didn't do the pilot, you'd still be at zero.
Quickly, I wish we did not have to do pilots, but it's
right.
That's a hand we've been dealt. Mississippi has an income tax, Arkansas has an income tax. They use that for infrastructure, whatever, as incentives. We don't have that. I wish we had something other than
You had a proposal with some of the border counties, border cities in the state legislature to make some changes that would give you some more latitude. Did that get anywhere in the legislature?
Not this year. It usually takes 2 or 3 years to get something like that.
Okay. And we have Mark
done.
Norris on the show next week. We'll talk to him about that. Right. But it didn't pass, so we won't dwell too much on that. Let me go a couple more things back in the budget, and then I do want to come back to Bass Pro, which opens very soon. On the budget, one of the drivers of expenses clearly, for the city is people. What is it, 70% of the budget? Some 40+% of the budget is police.
That's correct.
There was a lot. There was the blue flu roughly a year ago as you all were making changes to benefits. A lot of angry families, a lot of angry police officers, a lot of people in the community saying, "Hey, Memphis has a big crime problem. Why are we doing anything to hurt any police officers? We need our crime fighting." Do you feel now, and there have been people who've talked about droves of police officers and fire as well, but droves of police officers leaving the force, a real retention problem and a recruitment problem. Is that the reality from your seat?
Yes. Listen, we're going to have to do something about that. Let's be honest about that. We used to lose about 2 officers a month. We're running at about 8 per month now. We're down to around 2,100. We've got 2 classes. So we have to do something about that. That's just point blank. As a matter of fact, contrary to what you've heard about, we're not negotiating as we speak. We are in talks. We have to do something about that. I could be smug and arrogant and say, no big deal. It is a big deal, and we're going to address it. This is why we have 2 classes in the upcoming budget. Out of that, roughly $7 million for public safety, $5 million goes to police. We'll be able to do some promotions, which hopefully will improve morale, run 2 more classes, and so we have to address it.
Let me ask, we have just 5 minutes left here. So 2 incidents lately on social media. One was a mob incident, people said, at a gas station on Cleveland. And then your thoughts first on that, when you saw that happen.
It's unacceptable. It's unacceptable. But I have a rough enough time trying to run the city. I'm not going to try to run White Station High School, Superintendent Hobson, but when it spills into the streets, we will take action. Director Armstrong's folks have made the arrest. But on the good side, when you look at all the children who are not doing that, the 1,000 kids who are getting the summer jobs, the 400 or 500 in the ambassadors program, they're showing up, they're behaving, but when they get into the streets, they will be dealt with, as was the case at the BP station.
Okay. We'll go back to Bass Pro for a second. There's some confusion about whether there will be a pedestrian bridge from Bass Pro to the Pinch District. The Pinch District has been decimated by the kind of dormancy of the pyramid for all these years. As I understand it, Bass Pro says the city's going to build this pedestrian bridge. The city thought Bass Pro was going to build it. Will there be a pedestrian bridge, and who is going to pay for it?
It was a trade-off. When originally announced, you didn't hear about a hotel being in there, but the lodge in there it's booked up for months right now. Oddly enough, where you would have entered would have been right there on what I call the mezzanine level. That's where the hotel is. I take the hotel over that walk. Plus, Memphis need to get out and walk. They need to exercise. They can still go a few steps around, come in the north side. We're looking for, yes, there will be a walkway in there, but in the meantime, you can still walk in just by going and coming in the north entrance there.
And you think the city will end up having to fund, though, whatever sort of walkway that goes
Well,
through?
that's still to be determined.
All right, Bill.
Let me go a little bit down the riverfront, Mayor, to Beale Street. And the City Council has approved your 13 nominees for the Beale Street Development Authority, the next leadership group for the next phase of Beale Street. But they had some concerns about how many had direct business interest in the streets. Are you looking again at some of those nominees? Will there be a change in some of those?
And it's so odd, the push to include business owners did not come from the original. It was added by the city. And so when we comply with what the city said, they say, hey, that's a conflict of interest. But to answer your question, to keep things moving, and we've already had orientation for the ones who were approved. We'll take a look at them. Beale Street is too important for us to get bogged down on the political dilly-dallying. Keep in mind, it's the development authority, and we've got investors waiting. That's a business proposition. We're not going to let politics bog it down.
All right. And I want to move to Overton Park because I don't think we've talked about that in a while. There are some concerns about where the line is on the greensward for parking those cars by the zoo. And last weekend, Some of the folks who have been critical of this and want to see it end actually put up some signs that said, "Save the greensward," on the other side of the orange cone. So we've got kind of a wall going there.
Yeah, I'm going to watch. I personally went over just to see. I didn't get over there last weekend. I'll go this weekend to see. Keep in mind, this is not a permanent arrangement. It's for 3 or 4 years, and the zoo's going to come up with a permanent solution. I understand fully. We'll make sure that they stick within the designated areas. We're not going to park over the whole greensward, and we'll stay within the cones.
And on the same property, the Eggleston Museum kind of got outed, the plans that had been developing on that in the midst of all of this parking controversy. Are those plans still on? What can you say about that?
They're back on. Something came out once that the folks who are working on that were backing out, but they came back and said that's simply not true, so the Eggleston plans are back on.
Is it the parcel that's East Parkway and Poplar?
It's the original parcel, and we will allow I don't have a map here, but it's the original design, I'll put it that way.
And Mud Island, Andy Cates, the Cates family, there's talk that they would do a private partnership with Mud Island that's run by RDC right now. Are you interested in that? Are you interested in something happening with Mud Island?
We're trying to take a breather. Let's get Bass Pro open. We don't know what stakeholders. Once they see the success there, we want to get everybody around the table. But the Cates proposal is attractive, but we'd like to look at everybody who has a proposal.
Mayor, thank you for being here. Brian Collins, thank you. Bill, thank you. And thank you for joining us. Join us again next week.
Funding for Behind the Headlines is provided by DHG and Advisors. DHG is a full-service accounting firm serving Memphis and the Mid-South region for more than 60 years, combining community involvement with the technical resources of a national firm. For more information, visit dhgllp.com.